worst introductions ever by challenging you. Do you know this person? Yes, it is Albert Einstein, the famous scientist of the modern era. What has Einstein to do with the research of Pentateuch? Not so much. But I think one of his quotations will help us enter into today's topic smoothly. What is that quotation? Learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow. The important thing is not to stop questioning. Well, what has this to do with biblical studies? One of the important connections, I think, is that the Pentateuch scholars are still asking questions. They have not stopped questioning. Hence, new interpretations are constantly being proposed in journal articles and many new proposals keep appearing. Such undertakings challenge or reaffirm conventional understandings about the composition of the Pentateuch. Nevertheless, I believe it must be clarified at the outset that no scholarly consensus has emerged to displace the old theories entirely. Let me explain. Suppose we are doing a poll of contemporary Old Testament scholars on the composition of the Pentateuch today. From America, Germany, and Europe, only a handful of scholars, a minority few, would endorse one of the modern models entirely. The oldest paradigm of Pentateuchal studies, as I highlighted in the last video, presupposes the Mosaic authorship of nearly the entire corpus from Genesis to Deuteronomy. According to the traditional belief, Moses is not only the chief actor in most of these books, he is the recipient of all the laws in Exodus to Numbers and the preacher of Deuteronomy. Indeed, Deuteronomy 31:24 states that Moses wrote the words of this law in a book to the very end. Therefore, many generations of readers from pre-Christian times to the 19th century among Jews and Christians believed that Moses was the real author of the Pentateuch. However, as clarified in my previous video, with the rise of historical criticism in the 19th century, a new paradigm of the Pentateuch established itself. Far from the books being written by one author in a short period, the historical criticism claimed that the Pentateuchal narratives were written by many hands over a long period. It was held that the earlier sources were written several centuries after Moses. Yahwist about 900 BC, Elohist about 800 BC, Deuteronomy about 600 BC, the priestly sources about 500 BC, and the final edition later still. This is known as the documentary hypothesis, and Julius Wellhausen is considered by many as the chief architect of the classical form of the documentary hypothesis. It is to be noted, however, that the conservative readers of the Bible were confused by the implications of the classical documentary hypothesis. For example, they doubted, how can we be sure that the incidents narrated in the Pentateuch actually happened if it was written so long after the events it describes, let alone that they are reported accurately? There was also another very important change in the direction of the Pentateuchal study marked by the rise of the documentary hypothesis. So far, up to the modern era, the main purpose of the Pentateuchal research had been to understand the text as it stood in the present form and to apply its teaching to life under God in the present. The classical form of the documentary hypothesis reimagined this, and the main purpose of the Pentateuchal research became or changed to understand how the text came into existence and the historical circumstances of its composition. Though this change in perspective is not without criticism, many critical commentaries which followed the classical documentary hypothesis were filled with the discussions of which source is being cited, when a passage was written, how it relates to non-biblical texts, what was its transmission history, what was his oral history, and so on. The origins of the biblical material, the hypothetical factors behind the final text, the text we are having now, not the present text, became the significant focus of study. The assumption was that the scholar's duty is to recover the earliest form of a narrative. The canonical text, since it was used to correlate, some of which were believed to be interpolations, is of little interest. In the first half of the 20th century, subtle modifications to the documentary hypothesis by scholars such as Old, North and Fordrad in Germany and the Albright School in America suggested that despite the late age of the Pentateuch, we can nevertheless recover a credible picture of the period of Moses and even of the patriarchal age. Hence, opposition to the documentary hypothesis gradually waned. And by the mid-20th century, the classical form of the documentary hypothesis, we can safely say, was almost universally accepted. It became the dominant paradigm to explain the composition of the Pentateuchal narratives. But in the 1970s, this cozy consensus began to be disturbed. The dating of the source was questioned. The historicity of the narratives was disputed. Even the principles underlying source division were challenged. This debate has been in full swing for the last 50 years and shows no signs of subsiding. Much of the argument is convoluted and depends on assumptions that are not universally shared. So, for the sake of clarity, we must simplify the debate drastically and just draw out its main strands and directions. The first to challenge the classical documentary hypothesis were the revisionist scholars led initially by North American scholars such as John Van Sutters and Thompson, then joined by German scholars such as Rentroff, Bloom and Levin, and supported by the British Old Testament scholar Norman Wibrey. We will discuss the contributions of these scholars in the next video. Thanks for watching. May God bless.